Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our Ask the Experts session for Microsoft Build. My name is Tim Hewer. I am one of the program managers on the .NET and Visual Studio teams, and I am going to be your MC here for a little bit. So I wanted to review a little bit with you what we're going to do throughout this session. So this is an Ask the Expert session. We'll talk about what to expect. I will introduce my team members who are joining me here, and then we'll basically open it up to Q&A. And I'll tell you in just a very quick second how to address that Q&A. So just a reminder, please use the chat to ask your questions. You may post anonymously or use your name. Upvote for your favorite question if you see one. We'll take a look at kind of sorting those and try to address the ones that are upvoted. And we'll try to answer your questions either online or also through chat. So we'll try to be answering as many as we can real time or through the chat as well. So be sure to look at through the chat. And then we'll try to give you some additional resources after this session here. This session is recorded. Please do not additionally record this session. And please help our moderators in the Q&A. Don't spam the chat. Please keep it focused to actual Q&A. And we do expect all participants to adhere to Microsoft's Code of Conduct. We want you to be respectful to others that are participating and create an inclusive environment, one that's free of harassment, discrimination, and those type of things. So thank you for participating and for adhering to that. So let me go ahead now and introduce my teammates here. So again, my name is Tim Hewer. I am one of the PMs on Visual Studio and .NET. And also joining me, I'll just introduce them. I have Mads Christensen from the Visual Studio team as well. Maddie from that can help us represent .NET Maui and everything that we just showed and announced around exciting new release for us in .NET Maui, as well as David, who is also another PM that works on .NET Maui, and Dan, who also works on the .NET team and focusing on Blazor and all those exciting topics that we just showed in our session here. So those are the experts that we have joining us today, and we are ready to answer your questions. So please start funneling them up. Let me recap what we just announced in the session here across a couple different aspects. So the session, if you weren't able to attend, please go back and watch it. It's BRK03. And we talked about .NET Maui, our multi-platform application UI, now generally available. This is a cross-platform native UI with C# and XAML, and a lot of goodness that we talked about and demonstrated throughout the release here. We also showed a Blazor hybrid, talking about using Blazor within .NET Maui as a hybrid solution for native apps. So using C# and HTML to build UI components, reusing those across web and native applications. And then Leslie was able to show us a lot of new things around Visual Studio 2022. We discussed or announced the ARM64 native support, and then showed a couple aspects as far as demos in there around AI assistance and spell check and port tunneling feature. A lot of good new stuff in VS 2022. And then lastly, we touched on some GitHub integration, new Git capabilities and GitHub integration for Visual Studio. Showing GitHub Actions kind of starter workflows for .NET Maui and using CI to be able to build Maui applications. And then a couple new features in GitHub, advanced security with secret scanning and push protection, as well as workflow job summaries. And we used an example using test those. So those are some of the recap of what our session was about. Lastly, just as a reminder as well, .NET Conf we announced during the session will be November 8th through the 10th, where we will launch .NET 7 at the conference as well. With that said, let's jump into some Q&A. And let's take a look. Do we have anyone have any favorite ones they want to tackle first?
I can take the one about XAML and Blazor if you'd like.
Awesome. Let's do it, Dan. Dan
so
Roth.
It's from Robert. Hello, Robert. He says, I have a web development background. Do you get more features or native functionality using or learning XAML than just creating a .NET Maui app solely using Blazor? I see more XAML tutorials for .NET Maui than Blazor at the moment. So when you embed Blazor into a .NET Maui application, your Blazor components are going to render web UI, HTML and CSS to an embedded web view control. So you are rendering HTML. You're using your web skills, your web code to build your user interface. When you're coding in XAML in Maui, those get mapped to native UI controls for whatever platform you're running on. If you're on Windows, you're going to get WinUI 3. If you're on Android, you're going to get Android controls, iOS and Mac, and so on. So the benefit of learning some XAML in Maui is that, well, now you can leverage those native UI controls, and you can put them side by side with your Blazor web view control, with your Blazor components, and add native UI features alongside your web UI. So is there value? Yeah, there is value, because then you can leverage the platform's native UI support along with your web development skills. Is it required? No. You can use your web development skills and build rich and interactive, beautiful user interfaces using just the web technology, and that does work just fine. But this is an opportunity for you to light up native platform features if that's something that you want to do. As for learning materials, of course, all the existing Blazor learning materials apply to Blazor in .NET Maui because it's just Blazor. They're just Razor files, the same syntax, the same code. We will roll out more learning materials as we progress now that we've got the initial release out the door.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. I'm gonna cherry pick a couple ones that seem to be related here. How much of a learning curve is there going to be from versus Xamarin Forms coming to Maui? David, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So Xamarin Forms is, hi, I'm David. Xamarin Forms is the predecessor to Maui. So the same XAML syntax, data binding, Visual State Manager, styles, and all that sort of thing is exactly the same stuff. We didn't rebuild or reinvent any of that stuff in .NET Maui. So all of that skill set comes forward. Really the only tweaks in Maui from, I mean, there's many beautiful tweaks, but the way that we handle app startup, kind of the container of the whole application had to change so that we could adopt multi-window and windowing. So the new app startup is different than what you would have experienced in Xamarin Forms, and layouts have changed, which some of the quirks of Xamarin Forms that you may have relied upon in the past hopefully have gotten all smoothed out. So if you're bringing Xamarin Forms code to .NET Maui, you may notice some of the layouts and things like that are slightly different, and the defaults have all been zeroed out. Xamarin Forms had some rather arbitrary and now dated default values because, you know, it was a 7-year-old framework that was kind of designed back when we had beveled edges on and gradients. Now gradients have come back back in early iOS. And so we've reset that, and you can declare your own defaults. So all in all, should be a rather smooth transition. You should feel very comfortable in it.
David, maybe staying along those lines a little bit with the Xamarin, there's a question here. What are the steps to consume Nuget packages that were built for Xamarin in Maui?
So if a package that you were using in Xamarin but has no dependency on Xamarin types or Xamarin target frameworks, those will continue to work as long as they're .NET standard or newer. But anything that had a Xamarin target to it or use Xamarin Forms types needs to be updated for .NET 6. The types for Xamarin Android, Xamarin iOS, for the most part, that's just a recompile and adding the new TFM. TFM stands for Target Framework Moniker. That's something the library maintainer would do, and then recompile and redistribute either a whole new Nuget package that is specifically .NET 6 and newer, or a combined package that is Xamarin and .NET 6 and newer. For Xamarin Forms, the namespaces need to change and a few of the underlying types need to be updated, and then that also needs to be recompiled and redistributed with the .NET 6 TFMs. We're seeing quite a few, and if you saw my blog post, I listed a bunch that I knew of, and we've already seen just this week several others have updated and shipped new versions. So those are the basic steps. It is an ecosystem move forward change, but hopefully we can, get as many of the most popular libraries this summer coming through and published and usable in Maui apps.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Maybe if you have a moment, maybe answer that question with a link to the blog post that you just referred to. That would be good, helpful. It's on the dev blogs. Keeping in line with tools for Maui, is there any comment? This actually was a question in our live session as well about testing tools for Maui apps, or what is kind of the testing story around there? Maddie, you have some thoughts there?
I do. That's a great question. So there are a bunch of different test frameworks that you can use for mobile UI testing. Of course, anything that you write that's just like a unit test will still work. It's just .NET, so you can use Test Explorer and all that wonderful stuff. But there is UI tests. We've seen a lot of Xamarin developers use that, and we want to bring that into Maui. So that's kind of on our list of things we want to do soon. That isn't quite out there yet, although I've seen some people on the internet saying that they got it working without any effort. So love to hear that. And then there are a bunch of other testing frameworks you can explore as well. But yeah, testing is one of the things that we know is really important, especially to our enterprise customers, and we want to make sure that we have a really solid story around that. So if you have thoughts, feel free to share them with me on Twitter or however. The best experience right now will be write your unit tests and use the usual Visual Studio tooling for that, and keep an eye out for news on UI test.
And then maybe, Maddie, while you're still here, just to reiterate the tooling kind of support story for Maui right now, there is a question of kind of like, hey, how will Maui merge with .NET 7 Preview as well? I think it's probably related to like what tools should I use to start working with .NET Maui?
Yes, great question. Right now, all of the .NET Maui support is in the preview versions of Visual Studio. So on Windows, it's Visual Studio 17.3, the preview branch. On Mac, it's also 17.3, also the preview branch. On Windows, Maui tooling will be stable when 17.3 goes stable. So that will happen in roughly a couple months, give or take. Visual Studio for Mac, we're probably going to take one more release just to make it really, really polished. So that will be coming around the time .NET 7 ships. But the reason we're keeping them in preview a bit longer is just because we wanted to have a shorter runway that we could fix some bugs on, make sure it's really, really good before we give it to everybody in Visual Studio. Yeah. But we didn't want to hold the SDK up, so we shipped it out. We said it's time. Get started.
Great. Let me mix in some VS questions here. So there's a question. Visual Studio 2022 is going to run native on ARM64. That was something that we announced. Does it use .NET 6? Can we expect VS 22 for x64 on .NET 6 in the future? Mads, you want to take this one?
Sure thing. I do believe that the ARM release runs on .NET Framework 4.8.1, which we also talked about, which is sort of the ARM supportive version of the .NET Framework. And I think there was another question that asked if 4.8 was the last version of the .NET Framework. I think we just announced the latest one is going to be 4.8.1. So no, Visual Studio is not running on .NET 6 for this release, Visual Studio 2022. Whether it's something we're going to do in the future, there has been no announcement or anything around that yet, but we're open to anything. You've seen we've done a lot of big architectural changes, such as supporting 64-bit, moving to ARM. So it's not something that's of the scale that we're afraid to tackle, but it has to, it's about priority and sort of the size of the effort. So we're definitely open to anything like that.
Great, thank you. There also was a question about we showed the new port tunneling in Visual Studio, and there's a question of the, how do I get that? And I think it is private preview. Maybe you can speak to that. And I think the question was specific, like, do I need to? It's asking for the kind of your tenant ID in order to get that working. Do I need to work with my IT team to enable that?
Me?
I can answer too. Yeah, so
I think
I'll go ahead and take this one. So the port tunneling is a private preview feature, and yes, you do. So it requires an Azure login, and so if you in order to enable it, we're making it identifiable by your tenant ID to make that a little bit easier for us to create some allow lists on the back end. So if you don't know that, yes, it would be working with your IT team, which might create some interesting conversations with your IT team. And in fact, that's some of the feedback that we need to know. Hence why it's in private preview today, is to work through the opportunities there to make sure that IT groups are satisfied with the security around things like port tunneling to your dev workstation. Here's a question, Dan. In the demo, we showed porting Blazor to native Maui. Maybe you can answer that little part, but can I do the reverse, porting Maui to Blazor?
So the thing we showed is you can take a Blazor web application, which is Blazor components rendering HTML into a browser. And you can do that one of two ways. You can use Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor Server. It doesn't really matter because your components are written the same way. You can then take those same components and run them in a .NET Maui application, basically shrink wrapping your web application as a native client app. So now it runs natively on mobile or desktop, and you can now use native platform features like native UI elements or native APIs, like you want to call into any of the various wonderful APIs that Maui provides for doing geolocation or compass or barometer or whatever. The opposite of taking .NET Maui and putting it in Blazor, I suspect that what's really being asked there is, can I take my XAML-based Maui application and now just run it on the web, like turn it into a web application? And conceptually, that actually does make sense. Like this is you can think of the web as just another platform. There's a Mac, there's Windows, there's mobile platforms, and then there's the web platform. So could we take the abstractions from Maui and get them to be abstracted over the web platform? Yeah, we could do that, and that's absolutely something we've been talking about. It's on our GitHub backlog to look at as a scenario. We've had various people ask for it, so it's something we're looking at. David can correct me if I'm wrong here. As far as I know, there's no committed plan yet to release that, but let us know if that's something that's interesting to you. Obviously, it's quite a bit of work, so we'll take some time to deliver said feature. But if it's important for you, let us know.
So Dan, along those lines around the Blazor Maui hybrid as well, there's a question about WASM, Blazor WASM, and how should we think about Blazor WASM now that we have maybe Blazor hybrid on native apps as well?
Yeah. So Blazor WebAssembly is all about getting .NET code and your Blazor components running in a browser environment. Browser environments traditionally could only run JavaScript, and then they enabled running this low-level bytecode called WebAssembly. So we built a .NET runtime in WebAssembly that you can deploy with your app, and now you can run .NET code in any browser. That's what Blazor WebAssembly is for. Blazor Hybrid is actually different. In a Blazor Hybrid app, you're running in a native client app. You're not running in a browser. You're running on Windows or Mac or wherever, where you have a normal .NET runtime. Whatever .NET runtime implementation for that particular platform. So we don't need WebAssembly in a Blazor hybrid app. We can just run your Blazor components right there on the normal .NET runtime. They can interact with the platform in the normal way. Just call normal .NET APIs, do native interop if you want, and access anything in the platform that the platform offers. So they're different scenarios. Blazor WebAssembly is for the web, specifically when you want to run client-side in a browser. Blazor Hybrid is allowing you to use web technologies, .NET web technologies, in a native client app. WebAssembly in that scenario in Blazor Hybrid is not involved at all. We're not running your components in the browser context. They're just using the browser as a place to render the HTML, but all the code is running out of the browser context in the native .NET process.
Great, thank you for that. Another question that is a theme type of question, we also saw this in our general session as well, is what is the Linux story for .NET Maui? David?
I would love to talk about this. Yes. So certainly when it comes to, we have our 4 targets that we have now, Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. And of course, Samsung partners with us and brings us to Tizen for their devices. But where do we go next? We certainly see that a lot of other frameworks in the ecosystem kind of go for the breadth. And so they end up on WebAssembly for the browser, and then they have a Linux option. So we're also hearing this from our customers, and we're looking at the market research and the data. I think where we are now, Dan and I and others are really digging in to understand the real customer needs here. And so what I would say at this point in our journey is we're in the fact finding. Certainly we have a lot of history of facts, so don't get me wrong. It's not like we're just starting from zero. But we really want to understand today and tomorrow, what are the kinds of apps that you're building? What would a Linux solution that Maui runs, what would that need to look like? And I know that some of the answers I got earlier were, well, I just want it to be able to do everything, and that's good, and sure, we'd love to get there, but we need to get really specific, and so we can prioritize our work and make wise investment with the resources that we have to deliver the right things. So my call and my request to you on the Linux topic is, if you have real needs, whether as a developer you just want to be productive, or you have business needs, you need to build this app. Get us that information and let's have a conversation about it. And so we can build up that understanding and make sure that we put together a plan that we can execute on and that you're going to be delighted with when we actually ship it.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight. I also see a question here. I'll take this one. Will Azure DevOps have specialized tasks and support for Maui or just GitHub Actions? So it might be good to clarify what we kind of showed in the demo there. At present, there really isn't, I will call it specialized actions. My interpretation of that is meaning like, an encapsulated action that you just have to kind of provide maybe few parameters for. One of the things that Visual Studio does is provide you what we call starter workflows. So being able to kind of inspect your project and be able to run the necessary kind of .NET build and publish commands. And those are using the standard CLI commands that are available to anyone, regardless of what CI agent you have. So also available in ASDO as well, using the standard SDK. And now that we have a unified SDK for Maui, you'd be able to use the same CLI commands to acquire the Maui workload and to run the build and deal with the artifacts how you wish, whether that's a continuation to use other tasks and actions to publish to stores or some other mechanism for you to distribute. So right now, I wouldn't consider us having specialized tasks, but if that is something that you feel is of high value, please give us that feedback. And if you want to see those as a part of our starter workflow kind of efforts in Visual Studio, please use VS Feedback to give us those requests as well. Here's just kind of a future. So what's next for Maui after GA?
Good question. Dave, do you want to answer this? You want me to?
I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm sure we have two different answers, honestly. So maybe I'll go first, you go second. I mean, obviously the tooling, right? So that's exciting. It's coming down the pipeline. Upgrade assistant support. So it'll be really easy for you to get your Xamarin apps and your libraries over to Maui. A little bit on the tooling side. I mean, we want to bring .NET Hot Reload to Visual Studio for Mac at some point. So that will be really exciting. There's a bunch of ideas we have around better profiling tools for Maui. Making Hot Restart, which is the ability to develop for iOS without your Mac, just for debugging, doing that, and having less limitations with that, and plenty of other quality of life changes, integrating more with other things we see across like the Visual Studio and .NET tooling family. I could explain some of the SDK stuff I think is cool, but I'll let the SDK expert do it himself.
Yeah, so if you were wondering why there were two .NET Maui representatives on the call, it's because I primarily work on the SDK side of things, our controls and layouts and Android, iOS, et cetera. And Maddie wrangles all of the productivity and the tooling side of things, but we're a two-headed monster, if you will. So in terms of what's really next for Maui, of course, we just GA'd. Yay. So now we already have 2 servicing milestones to resolve, high priority bugs for the next 2 months. We're shipping on the .NET servicing cadence. So that's a monthly opportunity for us to ship quality of life fixes to you. And then, of course, we are waiting for those, not waiting for, but we're collaborating with our tooling partners to make sure that we get a really good, solid Visual Studio experience. And so the remainder of our time from now to .NET 7 is going to be focused on, first of all, getting .NET 7 out there, which we may hit the next preview if we can get all of our builds aligned. And then quality. We have a few things that are outstanding. I posted the known issues that also illustrate or document some of those. So we need to resolve those. Quality. Did I say that already? And then, we have some Android performance wins that we'd like to go after still. We're, of course, monitoring our performance and our app size across all the platforms as well. And then our native interop. Binding projects, if you've ever heard that, and it sends shivers down your spine. There are some things that we think we can do to improve that story and just make interop with Objective-C, Swift, Java, Kotlin a bunch easier. So we're going to investigate and see how much of that we can tackle. And really, in terms of any other new functionality, it's primarily going to be on elevating our desktop story. So there are some gaps in terms of things you would need and expect and want from desktop that you currently can do. It's a bit more effort. And so what can we do to make that easier for everybody? So that is what's coming up in the very short term. That really only describes like the next 6 months. And that's a lot. So what's beyond that? I don't know. Is it Linux? Is it WASM? Is it, I don't know, running on everybody's Teslas? Giving everybody a Tesla? I don't know. Sky's the limit. This is the magic wand portion of the discussion.
Let me keep you on this question here. I think you maybe have answered it, and when you talked about your blog post about the ecosystem as well, but a very specific one. Want to build a multi-platform app that accesses Bluetooth and USB. Does Maui have the Bluetooth and USB across platforms, or is that an ecosystem?
Yeah, so we definitely look to the ecosystem to fill that gap at this point. There may be some things that we can add to our APIs in the future, but I actually noticed this week that one of the popular Bluetooth Nuget packages out there had just updated to .NET 6. So I retweeted it, and of course, I haven't had a chance to try it. And then Shiny, which is a popular library in the ecosystem these days from Alan Ritchie, also has some support for Bluetooth, and he has shipped a Maui compatible version. USB, just like you would normally access that kind of stuff in native code, you can totally do all that stuff now. That's kind of the theme with .NET Maui, right? Because we are native, you can always do these things. It's how easy is it going to be for you? And our job as a cross-platform framework is to prioritize the things that we kind of elevate into that space and just make it easier. So let us know what your experience is. Are those Nuget packages serving your needs? Is there more that we could do? Open an enhancement for us. Let us know.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, David. We got a few minutes left here. Let me, I'm just going to pick away a couple of the VS specific ones. There's a couple questions about, maybe something's not working ideally in your VS situation. I see that there's a Razor editor question. We've made a lot of effort in the Razor editor. So if you're working with Razor or Blazor applications, this is what you would use. The best way to give us feedback is to use the Visual Studio report a problem. We do get a lot of diagnostics there that help us more accurately, more quickly, I should say, diagnose kind of those things. So truly, that is the best way. I know it can feel like a task to you, but hopefully we've made it simple from Visual Studio. You just say report a problem and help us understand what you're working on, and we get some anonymized diagnostic information to help us. So I'd encourage you to do that. There's also a question about some of the things in VS22 not working. There's one about SQL Server. We actually did just, I believe, within the week, released a blog post of some updates around SQL Server extensions. I think there still might be one that's still out there, but be sure to check the blog on that, because some of those have been updated in the marketplace as well there. Okay, anyone else to see a question that? Here's a good one. Can a Maui app be created from the CLI and be developed in the CLI, or is Visual Studio the best way to create a Maui app?
It does have CLI support, and it is amazing. So yeah, you can .NET new Maui if you want. If you want to use whatever text editor of your choice to edit your XAML or your C#, go right ahead. We've seen plenty of folks do it, especially before we had VS Mac support. So yeah, it's just .NET. So anywhere you can develop .NET, you can write your Maui app. Where you're going to deploy it is different. Like you'll have to have an Android emulator or an iOS simulator or something to deploy it from CLI. And those tool chains could be a little bit more complicated, but you can absolutely .NET new and start coding, especially if you're on a platform like Mac or Windows where it just runs natively on the desktop anyways.
Great. And I think that the team has said that they'll stick around a little bit longer. So let's go over maybe 10 minutes. Let's try that. Is that okay with everyone? We'll blame David.
I did back channel that we should just go over.
Yeah.
I don't know if producers will allow us.
Everyone should really know that we always blame David anyway. So
please do.
It's good to get it out there. Hey, Mads, how about this one? Will you ever be able to develop remotely with Visual Studio as you can with VS Code, either in a container, SSH, and maybe in WSL?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get that quite a lot. So with the GitHub Codespaces and VS Code's remote development option, they're kind of using some specific features of that in VS Code that allows that to happen. Visual Studio doesn't have kind of that sort of architecture that allows for that. But having said that, you can in fact run and debug and test your apps on WSL2 from Visual Studio. And that works quite well and has worked for quite a while, and we continue to make improvements to that. And so that's true for .NET and for C++ and other app types. So you definitely can do that, but it's not the same. It's not like running your entire thing on a remote instance or a container somewhere else, and you kind of SSH into it. It's kind of different, but most workloads will probably see the same kind of benefit for both models.
Great, thanks. I'm going to give Dan you a kind of a two-parter. I think you may have answered this one initially, but I'll lob it for you as well. How should I think about Blazor WebAssembly versus Maui Blazor? First part.
Okay, well, we talked a little bit about that earlier, but Blazor WebAssembly is for running in a browser for web apps, like running .NET code that's going to run in a browser client. Blazor Hybrid, which is the broad term we use for the pattern of running Blazor components in a native client app. .NET Maui, of course, being a logical native client framework to use for your Blazor components, is where you're going to run your Blazor components directly in a native client app and render them to an embedded web view control. So one's for native client apps and one's for browser-based applications.
Okay, so a little pivot, and I actually got the question wrong, so I'm blaming myself. But how should I choose? When should I choose between .NET Maui and Blazor Maui?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way I think about this is, if you're a web developer and your skill set, the code that you have is web code, like you write HTML, you do CSS, you've been using ASP.NET Core, maybe you've already been doing some Blazor, then .NET Maui with Blazor is a great way to get into the native client game. Like if you have a web app that you're like, man, I really need to turn this into a mobile application or a desktop application. How can I do that? Well, guess what? You can now use your skills and even your code to build that native client app with Maui. If you're coming more from the native client side, like let's say you're an existing Xamarin developer, you've been doing Xamarin Forms, or maybe you've been doing native desktop development with WPF, even WinForms, then I think the native programming model for Maui may feel a little bit more natural. Like if you like XAML, you're used to writing XAML, well, Maui's got XAML, and that will allow you to write native UI controls for all 4 of the platforms that Maui currently supports. Now, granted, these technologies are not meant to be silos. They can be used with each other. You can put native UI controls and XAML right next to your Blazor UI as well. Like the Blazor integration with Maui is literally just a native Maui control. It's a Blazor web view control. So you can mix and match these technologies to your heart's content, but they are kind of intended for those audiences. If you're coming from web development, Blazor is a great way to go. If you're coming more from native client development, then you might feel more at home with the existing XAML support.
Awesome. I'm going to lob this one to the kind of, I think this is a good Blazor and Maui in general. So more recently, we also have had a conference about accessibility and inclusiveness in software. And this question kind of tips on that. We've heard lots about making websites inclusive this build and our previous conference. How can we make Maui apps more inclusive as well? Any tips? And I think that extends to Maui and Blazor and all those things too. Anyone have any tips or ideas?
I would like to start off on that because the SDK team, our engineers, have been meeting for several years now, it seems like, many customers on a monthly basis to really understand how they are implementing mobile accessibility and now desktop accessibility. What are the different scenarios that are important? And we learned a lot. So what we did was we built these semantic services that are now baked into .NET Maui. If you look at our default templates, they're right there. And we are continuing to evolve those. And in the community toolkit, we also have some additional services to help you with things like specifying what the screen reader would read, how a element identifies, setting focus on different elements within the UI. And you can control all of that from a specific API. So you're not overriding other things and kind of having to work around stuff. So really excited to see how well that pans out with everybody. It was informed by a lot of customer research, and we continue to do that. We have open office hours with developers to discuss these issues. So check that out and let us know how it goes. We have documentation around all this stuff as well, and it's called out in my blog post.
Thanks, David. Matt.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I want to channel Dante, who is the Visual Studio Accessibility PM. And here's some advice that he gave me, because I asked him, if I write a Visual Studio extension, how do I make sure it's accessible and it follows the sort of the principles and the rules around that. And he gave me some advice that I've used ever since, and I think it's really, really cool. He said the best way to check it without installing any, screen readers or anything like that is to use the Windows Narrator feature. It's built into Windows, so you already have it. And turn it on and simply move around, tap around your app, whether it's a website, Maui app, Visual Studio extension, any type of UI you're building. And that will tell you what screen readers are going to hear. And so you can kind of optimize. And then what David was saying, like, go check out the documentation. How do you add the right properties and automation text and such for the screen readers so that they get that great experience as well. But I just thought that was something I wanted to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that, calling that out. So we're going to conclude the Q&A for our session here. I just want to thank my team for participating. Thank you all for submitting your questions, both during our session as well as during this session here. So thank you. We appreciate you spending time with us. Just a reminder here, some links for you to get started. Go to the .NET site /Maui to get started with .NET Maui. If you haven't downloaded Visual Studio 2022, both the release and the preview, to be able to get the Maui support, go to visualstudio.com/download. And please be sure to save the date for .NET Conf. You can view all the information there at .NETconf.net. So thank you again for spending your time with us wherever you are in the world. We sincerely appreciate you. Thanks.